Hey customizers, welcome to the next episode in the airbrushing camouflage tutorial. To all my subscribers, thank you very much, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to Talking Hands Customs. We left you off with a disassembled Skyhawk, and we talked about colors for Slaughter's Marauders and that we were going to look at the camouflage pattern. So as you can see, I've primed and painted my Skyhawk parts. The dark green, which we talked about, is the base color for this scheme, which does run counter to some airbrushing philosophies that you should always airbrush the lightest color first and then go to the darkest. But when you look at Slaughter's Marauders vehicles, this is the dyed plastic that they come in, and then the other colors are painted on top of that. So that's why we've done what we've done. We've actually put on the darkest color first. And with a lot of things I found with airbrushing is that certain people like doing certain things certain ways, and some techniques will fall in and out of style. It's an art form like anything else, so things change. Pick what works for you. Me personally, I like doing it this way. I've done it in the past like this with success. You've seen it work on the Grizzly project, so I'm going to stick with that until it utterly fails me, and I don't think that it will. So let's bring in a Slaughter's Marauders vehicle, and let's look at the camouflage pattern, because you need to analyze the camouflage pattern that you're about to replicate to really understand it, and then to be able to translate it onto your project. So here's the links. I gave it a fresh cleaning, so the colors are super vibrant and all that jazz. And it's got a semi-gloss to a gloss sheen on it. You can see the light reflecting there off of the hull. So it's striped camouflage, right? You'd think that's pretty straightforward, but to take into consideration the fact that it's not all straight lines. That's not to say it's not hard-edged camouflage. The demarcation line between the colors is a solid line, but they're not straight lines. I have seen some customs done where, regardless of color choice, that they've made these straight parallel lines, and it actually breaks the illusion a little bit. While they did a fantastic job, it's cleanly done and everything else, it's just missing that one little aesthetic that kind of takes it out of the universe, right? So we can avoid that by looking at the pattern and then replicating that on our custom. So let's talk about it. We have the pattern established here, right? Dark green, brown, light green, brown, dark green, brown, etc., etc., and it repeats. In this case, it does touch here, the dark green and the light green, so you can make that happen on yours if you want to, or not. I've tried it, and I've tried not doing it, and quite honestly, given the shape of the vehicles you do it on, it doesn't take it out of universe by doing it one way or the other. So, you know, that's a choice you'll have to make for yourself. But when you look at these pieces of color, let's call them, they're triangular in shape for the most part, right? So this one's a triangle, this one's a triangle, this one's kind of a cut off triangle. I'm sure if you drew the line far enough out, it would be a triangle as well. But when you look at this dark green here, when it comes up, it's actually cut off a bit. Almost looks like a tiger stripe there, really. But then this brown is one piece, so you have this U-shaped brown splotch, something that you could incorporate into your scheme as well. So that's really the thing with Slaughter's Marauders camouflage, is it's striped, but the stripes are not uniform. And as you've seen clearly, the lines aren't even straight themselves. There's little variation and curving and swooping to them. So what that does is it allows us to be quote-unquote imperfect. So if you're going to use masking tape, by all means, but you might want to incorporate some curved edges into those masking tape pieces to help you sell the illusion of the Slaughter's Marauders scheme. The other thing being that in this case, I told you in the first episode there that the scheme started with the dark green up front and it ends with the dark green in the back, because the bottom of the vehicle is dark green. So if you're doing an armored vehicle or something where you think the bottom can stay dark green like that, then absolutely that's the best way to start. You don't necessarily want to have, you know, the light green, end your pattern at the light green in the back and have dark green there, because it would break the pattern, right? It'd be dark green, brown, light green, brown, right? Both of the greens are separated by brown almost all the time, right? It works on the Lynx because it was officially released by Hasbro, which means it's what you're going off of as a guide, but you're also not seeing the bottom of the armored vehicle. All you're seeing is the dark green color patch up here, which starts the camouflage pattern, and then it ends there, and that's all you see. So it looks like it's part of the pattern. And that's really all there is to it. Even then, what I like about the Lynx as an example is that once you go into other parts of the vehicle, the pattern matches up pretty well, but there's some places where it doesn't, and that gives you the freedom to do the same thing. Even when you look at the forward part of the cannon here, it technically marries up with this part on the hull, right, to keep the pattern balanced but not symmetrical, right, my favorite thing to say. But it's thicker up here than it is down here. So while it goes together, it's not a 100% match. So what that allows us to do is, depending on the vehicle you're doing, you might have to, wrap this camouflage scheme around multiple surfaces, much like the Skyhawk. So we can use that to our advantage as well. So let's get rid of the vehicle now. We've got a good understanding. If you don't have a Slaughter's Marauders vehicle, look at photos online and look at more than one photo and try and make them all from different angles, right? That'll get you the overall feeling of the scheme you've got. Or maybe you got a friend who's got the vehicle you're trying to replicate, in which case ask politely if you can borrow it and promise and cross your fingers that you're not going to get any paint on it. So let's talk about the Skyhawk then. Slaughter's Marauders. Wrapping the scheme around the fuselage is one thing, but now what we're going to do is we're going to take a fin, put it on the side, and we're going to try and maintain that pattern on not only this side of the fin, but that side, right? And what that will do is it will create unity in your pattern, or harmony in your pattern. So you wouldn't necessarily want to paint this in isolation from this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the fuselage, and then I'm going to stick the fin on here and mark off and mask the colors here and treat this almost like another mini fuselage, except the pattern's going to be matched up to wherever it needs to start based off of what's going on the main fuselage here, the tail of the vehicle. So, and what that's going to do is when you look at the Skyhawk from one angle, it's one thing to match it up here, but as you move it around, you don't want to really have any disconnection in the pattern depending on the angle you're looking at. I mean, sure, if you look at it like this, the lines aren't going to match up. It's physically impossible. But you want that unity to be as consistent as possible. So by matching those lines up on the fins as you do on the fuselage, will make your project look that much better. If you have a hard time doing that, like you said, right, the pattern doesn't match up perfectly when you go to different parts on Slaughter's Marauders, and I'm not going to match it up perfectly either. But I'm going to do my best to make it work. And I promise you the effort that you put into doing that will pay dividends later. It was easier to do on the Grizzly because it had that clear upper surface and that clear lower surface, and the camouflage wrapped around both sides. And if you haven't seen that video yet, go check it out, because we did Slaughter's Marauders all with a paintbrush, and it worked. So that's what we're going to have to do now. And then what I'm going to do is talk to you about the different masking formats that we can use for this. And what that is it's masking tape, like we've used in the past, and it's also masking fluid. Let's talk about the masking fluid first. I'm going to show you two different brands that I use. One is Microscale Micro Mask, and the other one is Vallejo Liquid Mask. I've been using this one more recently. This one I like using for model airplane canopies, but I've never used it in heavy application before, which means it's gone on very thin and come off relatively quickly. And I was learning about using the product as well. So let's look at the Vallejo mask here. And I know I use a lot of Vallejo products, but the fact is that I like them. You might find you use a different company's products, and that's totally cool, right? So what liquid mask is it's a thick liquid, and what you do is you brush it on anywhere you don't want paint. You can get it at an artist store too. It's called Artist's Gum or something like that, or Artist Mask, or liquid masking fluid, or whatever. And what you can do is basically brush it on like you would paint, and you apply it relatively thickly, and then when it dries, you can paint whatever you want around it, or even over top of it, and when you remove it, it was like you had masking tape there. The bonus to this is that you can make any shape you want, as long as you can do it with a brush. You airbrush this stuff? No, this is brush only. So what does that do? Well, for Slaughter's Marauders, that helps us, right? Because we talked about not having perfectly straight lines and introducing a little bit of organic flow to those demarcation lines between colors, and using the masking fluid will still allow us to have that solid demarcation between colors. So we can get that swoop and that curve in some of those lines. And I may use that on this project. I'm trying to not overburden anybody's wallet by showing you all these products that I use. But the fact of the matter is, it's a tool that you could have in your toolbox. And we'll talk about the masking tape as well. In fact, we'll do that right now. So for taping this stuff off, if you're going to do it, is there a reason why you can't take your masking tape and put a straight piece like that? Absolutely not. Do you want to do that for every single thing? Well, technically that's up to you, but if you're really trying to match that pattern, you don't want to have perfectly straight lines, because then it's just going to look maybe a little off. And if you're satisfied with doing it that way, go for it, right? Like I said a bajillion times before, it's your custom, do it the way you want. What I would do is, if I was really going for that authentic look, is when I would lightly place masking tape on the nose, and let's do a quick example here, because it's easier to show you necessarily than to explain it, because sometimes I ramble and I get lost. So let's say overall I wanted to have an angled line there, so I would put the tape on there very lightly. I'm just barely tacking it on. Then what I'm going to do is take a pencil, and I'm going to draw a curve in that line where I want the pattern to actually go. So let's go just like that, let's say. And I just drew a meandering line there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tape off very carefully. Sweet, didn't steal anything. And then I'm going to cut that shape out of the tape and put it back on. And then I'll have my little gentle curve. So you can do that repeatedly until you're finished your project. That's certainly an advantage for liquid mask in this case, in that all you do is you brush it on, you're good. Technically, it says on some of these products to only leave it on for about an hour, and you can totally do that, because when you're using the airbrush, you can separate your work and then just peel off as you're done. It really is that simple. It's a lot of hand work, but it pays to be patient with it. And of course, if you've got your airbrush settings dialed in and the paint's coming out the way you want it to, it's no issue. So speaking of that, when we use the airbrush, we are going to get into talking about how to do fine lines with your airbrush, certainly in this case as well, because we're going to move from just blasting on color, relatively speaking, right? In this case, we did it for the base coat here, to actually drawing in those lines with the camouflage. Now, you might be asking, well, if I put the liquid mask there or the masking tape there, then I can still blast color. Yeah, technically you can, but the good practice is for this is that when you put any sort of masking tape or masking fluid down, you always want to airbrush along that line or that edge of tape or fluid to seal that even further. Not so much necessarily with the liquid mask, but definitely with the masking tape. It's good practice to run your first strip of color along that tape so it seals it in again for subsequent paint to go down. And that will help alleviate any bleed under from your airbrushing, especially if your airbrush sputters or something goes wrong or your mixture's off, whatever reason. It helps protect against those mistakes and saves you some time in having to go back and reapply any sort of paint. With masking tape as well, we want to be careful. You could, if you wanted to, clear coat this, and I still may, before adding any masking tape, and then every time you do a new color, you want to let it dry and then clear coat that as well to protect it from subsequent layers. Absolutely. Because the thing we want to avoid here when we're doing this is that with a paintbrush, when you're brushing this stuff on, you control exactly where the edge of that is, and even when we did it with the grizzly, we overlapped the previous color. We're going to be doing the same thing here, except we'll be overlapping with the masking tape, and you should have the next color just barely showing on the other side, and then spray it with the new color. And what that does is it ensures that you have colors meeting up edge to edge with none of this base color showing in between, right? You don't want to have it showing in between because it looks incomplete. It's a little sloppy, to be honest with you, and it'll totally wreck the illusion. So you might have thought maybe at the beginning of this that camouflage was just like, oh yeah, we'll spray it on willy-nilly and it'll look good. And you can certainly do a freehand camouflage pattern if you're going to, for whatever you want to do for your custom. But when we're talking about replication, it pays to be patient and deliberate, right? And as you know, as well as I do, that the more time you put into a project, if you make sure you do things right or don't stop until you're satisfied, not only does that equal happiness, but your custom will look fantastic, right? And that's what we're trying to do here, is make things look fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to make some final preparations here before I start painting, and we will carry on. Okay, here we go. I've got my reference material here in the form of the links, and what I decided to do was be bold, and I'm going to try masking fluid over the whole pattern. It's something I've never done before, so I wanted to share that trial with you and to show that if you don't try new things, how are you going to know? So for the red color for this, I'm going to be using Game Color Terracotta mixed with Vallejo Model Color Dark Gray. This is the combo I used for the Slaughters Marauders Grizzly, which turned out quite well. I'm not a measuring kind of guy. I'm an eyeball it kind of guy. So I know I have to make enough paint in here to last the whole project. And well, that's what I'm going to do. So, and when mixing paint, if you're wondering if you should use a toothpick or a cotton swab or something like that, use a brush. Use a brush, and then just put it back into the water or whatever you're using to thin it, clean your brushes with. And then if you need to touch it up, then you've already got some on your brush head. So there's the actual terracotta, and the camera is accentuating the differences in these colors, but they're certainly in the right family. So now what I'm going to do to purple this up, if you remember we talked about this color being a very purpley brown, is I'm going to add the dark gray to it. And the trick to doing this, because you're mixing it, basically I'll say always mix it to taste, right? So I'm going to add a little bit of dark gray at a time and stir it well, and then I'm going to stop and I'm going to compare it. And that's honestly, from what I've seen, the best way to do it. Because for all you know, if someone says, oh yeah, put in, you know, this many milliliters of this or this percentage of that, there's fudge factor in there, and if you follow their rules to the letter and you don't agree with the color, then what's the point? So I like adding a little bit at a time. And the reason why is that if you add too much, then you have to try and go back. And I'm not saying that won't ever happen. You might over mix, so you can add the original color back into it or whatever, but eventually you'll get this cup of mud, and then what are you going to do with that, right? So I'm just going to add this in a little bit at a time. Let's try that first, and then I'll take my brush and we'll go from there. You can do a little bit of back and forth with mixing color. If you have to mix some kind of color where you might use 3 colors, that's when you start getting into dangerous territory, and that you might lose the color and get quite literally mud. So I'm just going to mix that all up in there and see what's what. Ooh. Did I get it right on the first try? Maybe. Let's just take a look. Little more. You can see it's hard to get this because the paint right now is glossy because it's wet. And the vehicle has a sheen to it, but it's not so much. But we are definitely getting there. Definitely getting there. And if you're worried about wasting paint, don't be, because you may not mix enough of it. And maybe that someone might be saying, well, that's definitely a disadvantage to eyeballing it. And I would agree. But honestly, that's just the way I roll. That's my design choice. Kind of a weak explanation, but it's all I got for you. So I like eyeballing things. I've been told I'm good at it. So we might even be able to go just a little bit further. Little bit. Well, you know what? Yeah, a little bit. A little bit more. Now I'm really going to push my luck. Just a little bit. And let's see what happens here. Right, because you don't want to just put in a little bit and mix it and stir the paint a little bit, is that colors haven't had enough time to fully interact with each other, right? Fully interact with each other. So you might go you know, stir it once or twice around and then go, oh yeah, that looks good, let's go. And then the rest of the paints are still separated. They haven't had any time to intermingle. And then by the time they do, it turns out maybe it was too much. There it is. There it is right there, folks. I would say we're, you know, sheen, glossiness of the paint right now aside, we're bang on the money. So that's what I like about it, right? Is if I sat there and go, okay, I will add 3 milliliters. Okay, fine. And I stir it, no, that's not enough. Okay, another 3, or maybe 2. Then, yeah, you could add all those up maybe and come up with an answer. But what happens if you do it 3 milliliters at a time and that third round or whatever is too much by, you know, 3.5 milliliters or whatever? Either way, the eyeballing technique works. And like I said, I just walked it up there. I added paint a few times there, and now we're happy. And that could be enough to do the project. If not, I'm more than happy with remixing. And unfortunately, that's just part of the game, right? Is that you have to guess about how much paint you might need. And then if you get it wrong, well, be prepared to make some more. Have I had it where I tried to color match a mix like this and been wrong the second time, or couldn't match it the second time and had to do the whole thing over again? Yes. Quite honestly, yes. Does it bother me? I mean, does it take extra time? Sure, but the ultimate goal isn't how quick did I finish it, it's how well did I do it. So there it is. And for all I know, for some people out there, that could be one giant argument for measuring things in the first place, but I like to live dangerously, so there it is. All right, now I'm just going to add some thinner into this, and I'll be using Vallejo airbrush thinner. There we go. And I'll be stirring it again with a brush. Yeah, reason being, I mean, the brush is a painting medium, or painting tool, excuse me. So with a Q-tip, I find a lot of it gets soaked up into the, there, I'll do it on camera. A lot of the paint gets soaked up into the cotton bud, and it's hard to get all of it out, and then it disintegrates the cotton bud, and, well, there you go. And a toothpick is fine, but with these molded cups, there's that bumpy kind of seam in the bottom there, and you're flicking paint all over the place. Who needs that? We will see if that is indeed enough paint. Okay, so while that's kind of sitting there, I'm going to reassemble my airbrush. And this is it. I have never... While masking fluid, the principle of using it never changes whether or not your project is large or small. I've never used this much of it before. And when I was going into that container of it, I was like, oh my God, I could do like 14 projects and not even deplete half of the supply. So I'm doing this for, aside from the fact of trialing it for the first time and seeing what happens on camera, I want to use it up before it goes bad. I don't know what the shelf life is on that thing, but it's a gum, and I'll show it to you in a sec once I get the airbrush. Because I've talked about this masking fluid, but I haven't shown you what it is. And that's kind of part of selling it, you know, seeing is believing and all that jazz. So anyway, let's get this little fine nozzle on here. I gotta do this part off camera because I need to have my hands closed. So. And unfortunately, where the camera is, my face can't be, which is maybe a blessing in disguise. Okay. And I hope that I didn't say at the beginning, but I hope all of your custom projects are going very well, and that if you are running into some obstacles, you're chilling out and just thinking about it and overcoming those obstacles. Because you can't not have problems. There's no way that something goes off without a hitch. So yeah, that's my story I'm sticking to. Okay, so now I'm sorted here. I've got my paint mixed, my airbrush, got a test spray of thinner, and we're good to go. So now we're going to apply the paint on the model. So if you're doing this with masking tape, if you remember, we talked about spraying the line, or spraying a line where the masking tape, where the edge of the masking tape is. And what that will do is put a fine layer of paint there, which will help seal the mask, which will again help prevent bleed under. For this stuff, it kind of does that on its own by the fact that it's a liquid mask. And I'll show you here what it looks like. So there it is. It's almost like milk, about the thickness of milk. And And the cap here is what it looks like when it's dry. That's just from shaking it, stuff sticks to it over time, and there it is. It's rubbery. And on the model here, it dries relatively clear, maybe a tint of blue to it. The parts where you can see the light blue is where I put it on thickly, and it is still setting. Or it's gonna dry that thick. I like doing that because you can see it, so you know it's there, which is more of a psychological thing, I guess, than anything else. But it is what it is. So I've got some mask here, and you can see it on camera there, that darker stripe there. It's very glossy. That's the liquid mask there. So I've got a stripe here, a stripe here, and a stripe here. And I'm going to be painting the brown on the right-hand side of that mask. Excuse me. So, and those are the parts that I'm going to keep dark green, and they do go most of the way around where they need to, and all the way around where they don't. If that makes any sense. Either way, we're good to go. So let's just start spraying. And I'm about to turn the booth on, so watch your eyes. Okay, so here's what we've done. You may have noticed that my brown splotches were rather large, and there's a reason behind that, because now what we're going to do is we're going to mask off how much of the brown we want to keep, and we wanted some brown excess to then be covered over by the light green. So I'm going to mask this brown off, but not at the edge of it here where my airbrush put it, but back slightly, if that makes sense for you. And I'll be doing it here as well, pushing it back slightly from that edge, and then that stripe will become green. Same thing back here, and same thing everywhere else. So I'll have my dark green, brown, light green, brown, and then it starts to repeat itself. So I'm going to take some more liquid mask, and I'm going to, once this dries, I'm going to paint off the areas, or cover the areas of the brown I want to keep, and then we're going to do the third color. So the same thing with the masking tape, is that once this settles, if you're using masking tape, you want to mask off the edge that you want to keep with some excess for the next color stripe to be applied. So stay tuned, and here we go. And here we are with the next color applied and the subsequent protection with the masking fluid. So all that's left right now is a little bit of cleanup. I've got some leaf down here that I'm going to get rid of, and then we spray the green on, so, or the light green anyway, and then we'll be finished our camouflage. So I'll get that done, and then I'll show you what the end result looks like. And there's our final color on. If you use masking tape, it shouldn't look this bad, but you can see the gloppy mess that this masking fluid is. But spoiler alert, it's about to look like it does up here. So with taking off liquid masking fluid, It's very rubbery, right? So all you have to do is start rubbing at it with a thumb, finger, whatever. You don't want to use a knife, and then it starts coming right off. So check this out. You can see it's very gummy. Look at that camouflage. Okay. Now, as cool as this stuff is, you're still going to need to do touch-ups, right? Who are we kidding? You know, I don't think there's a tool out there yet that will let you avoid it. So now I'm just rubbing it with my thumb. And the light green paint hasn't been dry very long, so this stuff is quite excellent for that. The disadvantage of this is you're brushing it on, right? So if you don't brush it on thick enough, or it runs somewhere you don't want it, or whatever, and you don't notice it and you peel it off, well, you'll have to do some more touch-ups. But overall, I would say that we are off to the races. So here's more of an example here. There's a nice clean camouflage revealed underneath. It's a little weird to use, and quite honestly, I've never used this much of it before. So, you know, I did have my fingers crossed, hoping that I didn't make too many mistakes with it. But as you can see, I think it's turning out just fine. It does take a while to remove. I've already done the other side here just to show you. And you can see there, right on the tail, that light green spot where my brush didn't apply it fully. But other than that, there's your colors right there. So I'm going to continue to rub this stuff off here. Oh, there's it's like a sunburn, eh? Remember when you were a kid, you get a sunburn, you want to peel all the skin off? Like, don't touch it. Well, I'm going to. Look at that. There it is. There it is. Look at that nice big chunk right there. So anyway, I'm going to continue to clean this stuff up. Yeah, I'm weird. And we'll come at you with a clean Skyhawk. So, just hang tight. And here we are with the results of our efforts of masking. I used the liquid mask, the Vallejo stuff, as I showed you, right? At the end of the day, another point of comparison, which I unfortunately threw out, was how much masking tape you would have balled up when you were done compared to how much of this liquid mask you would. And the liquid mask was maybe a chunk about that big, whereas the masking tape could be much larger, maybe fit in the palm of your hand, depending on the size of your subject and whatnot. It took me a toothpick to get in there to get some of it out, which is fine. I'm willing to deal with that hassle. Based off of the results I got off the toothpick, or off the liquid mask. As you saw in the previous scene there, where it looked like a soupy mess, but all I did was rub it off and it revealed our camouflage pattern. And this is hardline camouflage. As you can see, and I'll hold this up a little closer, we have a solid demarcation line between the colors, and that's exactly what we were looking for. It can be accomplished with the masking tape as well. That's the traditional method of doing it, but the liquid mask is something I wanted to talk to you about and show you as another tool in the toolbox. And I still have so much of this stuff left, it's not even funny. I could have done probably a bajillion of these if we're using the metric system. And still got very nice results. What it does lend itself well to, because you're brushing it on, the swoop and curve, the gentle swoop and curve of some of these camouflage lines that we talked about, is easier to accomplish in a much more controlled manner than it would be with masking tape. That being said, if you don't want to use the liquid stuff and you want to use the masking tape, just remember to keep in mind, you don't want to put straight pieces of tape on there. You want to trim off some edge, or however you want to play the masking tape on, to achieve that flow of camouflage. And let's talk about the color scheme here overall first. I did something a little different than what I normally do, and maybe let's call it instinct, or at least my instinct would be to make the skis black, and if I was going to leave some dark gray in there, leave it somewhere else on the vehicle. But in this case, it serves a purpose. And because this is Slaughter's Marauders, and I intend to put some Slaughter's Marauders figures in it and on it, I wanted to neutralize any potential for paint transfer. And we've talked about that. When you customize something, there is always that risk. And Slaughter's Marauders figures, in my opinion, I mean, based off of everything I've seen, are one, more hard to come by, and two, they're way more expensive than your generic versions of the same figures. So in this case, what I did is, while the black is a strong color and would anchor the custom itself, so it would make kind of artistic sense to put it on the skis and whatnot, I flipped it. So I have the engines and the forward cannons black, and I have the skis the dark gray. The other thing that did is that when I had these unpainted and I left them on the model, with the dark gray and the brown and the dark green, especially where they are on the vehicle, they kind of all bled together a little bit. And trying to look at the pattern of Slaughter's Marauders, like what gets painted gray, what gets painted black, etc., what gets camouflage, what stays green. I don't want to say it's inconsistent, but not all the vehicles have all the features for those colors. For example, the Armadillo tank just has a solid green turret with all white missiles on it. And as far as I can remember, no gray at all. So it was a question of, well, where do you put it? How do you make this fit into the team overall? And how do I make the Skyhawk fit into the Marauders family? So in this case, I left the skis bare, and that dark gray works for that scheme. And I left the seat bare in the cockpit. I had it all masked off there, and now it's been revealed in all of its glory. So I have my dark gray in there as well, and I have the black on the engines. And the black on the engines and the guns is strong enough to carry that theme on, whereas on the Equalizer, the Lynx, etc., they have the tracks black, and that's a big feature, and it's a very strong color. But in this case, in my opinion, given the scale of the vehicle, having the engines, which are up front and in your face, the darkest color, kind of balances it out. It equates, right, to the same thing. And the other thing that works is I painted the missiles white, because Slaughter's Marauders missiles are white. So aside from having that bright pop of color, what it does is it forces the contrast. So you can see how the skis and the side of the fuselage here, which is the dark green, have kind of that same value to them. One's not brighter than the other, they're just different colors. But by putting the white there, I think it forces the skis to look darker. And that happens with anything, right? Something could look like this green here can look very dark, but if I put black beside it, suddenly it's not that dark anymore, right? It's the same thing with the skis. So the skis are only a dark gray, a warm dark gray, but when I put the white there, it forces this further down the spectrum to darkness. It may sound silly, but it's totally a thing. So there you have it. I've got stickers for this already. This isn't going to be the final reveal. This is just to show you the camouflage pattern and the color balance that I used for the accessories to complete the scheme itself, because this tutorial series is about camouflage. The other trick I'm going to do, which definitely applies to the Skyhawk and other vehicles as well that may have an elevating turret or some feature that rotates, that over time has gotten loose, because some G.I. Joe accessories, vehicle accessories, will shrink. Stuff I've heard is that, because the plastic's different, one will shrink over time where the other doesn't. So in this case, and you may know this from experience, is that the engines in the Skyhawk will droop. They'll sit in the vertical lift position, which, if that's what you're into and that's the way you want your vehicle displayed, then that's great. For me, I prefer the horizontal position. The main reason being is that it takes up more space visually. So here you're looking at the whole length of the engine, but when it sits vertically, all you're really seeing is the tip of the engine here, and the rest of it kind of gets covered by either the fuselage or the side fins here, depending on your viewing angle. But when you've got them up here, then it really works. And what that also does is it helps to illustrate my point about having this major component, the part that's painted black. So you get a good, strong color that's painted on a very prominent accessory. And the trick is to take clear nail polish. People have said, well, if you use, they've suggested other things. I've tried a few other things, like other clear coats or future floor polish and all that stuff. But the clear nail polish I've found so far works the best. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to brush it into there, and that will physically thicken up that bracket. And then before I put the engines on, I'll clear coat it just to hide the super glossy sheen of it. And then I'll put the engines on. And when it's dried, it's super hard, and that will keep the engines in the position I want, the horizontal forward flight position. So that's something I'm going to do later as part of the finishing process, and of course put the stickers on. So we will be seeing a final reveal of this vehicle. So now we've covered straight edge camouflage. There's lots of applications for it. Tiger Force falls into this, but really all you're worrying about is masking off those individual tiger stripes, and depending on how many you have, it's relatively straightforward, but the theory stays the same. And in this case, when you're doing it, you want to make sure that everything that you don't want the next color, you cover. I did have to do some touch-ups, right? That's going to happen, overspray and whatnot, despite your best efforts. So like we said, right, don't remove your masking material expecting perfection. Just remove your masking material, understanding that there's going to be some more steps to do before you're done. But I'm very happy with it. My colors don't line up perfectly if we're going to critique this piece right now just from an aesthetic standpoint. But if you see how the brown here lines up with the brown there, lines up with, well, you can't see it, but it lines up with the brown on the opposite fin as well. And same thing with the green and the brown again. So I thought about repeating the pattern from scratch on here. So starting off with the dark green, then the brown, light green, brown, etc. But I thought it would be too jarring of a difference, right? Because if you put the dark green here and you saw the brown back there, I actually prefer having this present itself as one cohesive scheme rather than a pattern applied to each individual piece. In this case, the fuselage separately from the fins. And I quite like how it's turned out. The top fin and the canopy being the solid green, that's the part that covers the solid green turret on the Armadillo or the side skirts on the Equalizer, etc., etc. So I think this fits in rather nicely, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let's put it beside the links and see how our colors turned out. A little tight in here, so just bear with me. Actually, you know what? We just need to get rid of the lazy Susan. We don't need it anymore. So let's put that in there. And there you have it. So what I've noticed, the differences in the camera being equal, because when I look at the greens, they match very closely with the Mark I eyeball, but on camera, the differences are exacerbated or highlighted. Any critiques I would say is my light green could have maybe a titch of yellow in it. So mixing in that third color, and I would mix that in last. Or sorry, for this green it was one color, so I'd mix some yellow into it. The red-brown turned out extremely well. If anything, I could make it a little bit more faded, so maybe put some white in there just to mute this color a bit. When you're mixing a third color in, you want to mix your base color first. So I put the terracotta with the gray and mix that to the value I want, and then I would add in the white. Because sometimes I found, and it could be just me being crazy, is that if you mix all three together at once, sometimes they interact in different ways. So I like bringing the color into the ballpark and then fine-tuning it with the third or fourth color. Keeping in mind that the more colors you add, the greater the likelihood is of making that mud color, and then you have to start again from scratch. So I think that's successful. I would say that's very successful. And once I get the G.I. Joe stickers on there and everything else, it'll really help blend it in with the links, I think. I am very, very satisfied with this. And like I said, right, with the color recommendations I give you, if you disagree with them, then that's totally cool. And if you find something better, then please let me know in the comments below, because I'm always looking to improve my stuff as well. The other neat thing that happened, I was an accident, a happy little accident, is that by having this brown color come up here and then up here into this combing, when you look at it from the front, the pattern is still mirrored. So you have the dark green brown, right? Which I thought was nice when you looked at it head on like that. It just kind of makes it more cohesive and blends it all together. So there's the dark, there's the hard-edged camouflage. It is just a matter of masking patience and making sure that you cover up stuff that you want to protect. Oh, and speaking of which, if you notice, the canopy's on. So I'm going to remove it real quick. Because if you recall, we had that one little thing we had to fix. And there it is. Right there. Let's get the focus going here. Come on. There we go. And there's our pin. I actually forgot to cut it short because I was so happy that it was the right diameter. I didn't have to putty it or anything like that. But it being a little bit longer, one, helps me show you that I'm not trying to blow smoke up your butt, and that I actually did repair it, and that it fits. And not only does it fit, but it still functions, which is fantastic. Because we talked about losing functionality in a custom whatever. And anyways, there you go. It sits, it works perfectly. I'm super happy. And if you've done the same thing, then you've repaired a canopy, which, you know, you might say, whoop-de-doo, I fixed a Skyhawk canopy, but no. Now that you know how to repair parts and fabricate pins and stuff like that, is there even such a thing as a broken Skyhawk canopy anymore? Think about it. So, why don't we call this episode here? We are going to do the soft camouflage next, but I think we've given enough information to digest. And we're going to do the soft camouflage in the next episode, and I'll reveal the soft camouflage vehicle along with the finalized, completely stickered up Slaughter's Marauder Skyhawk. And in the meantime, I got to think of a name for it, but if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. So why don't you put them in the comments down below? So in the meantime, as per usual, be safe and have fun.